A ranch owner is wrongly accused of trespassing at an HOA community pool, even though his property is independent. HOA members, led by Karen, escalate the situation by calling the police and preparing legal action. Despite his explanations, the rancher faces growing hostility from the community. A simple misunderstanding turns into an all-out legal and personal battle. The seeds of a much larger conflict are sown during a sweltering Texas summer. How could a simple swim during a scorching Texas afternoon spiral into a war over freedom, pride, and property rights? Come with us and listen closely as we unfold this unbelievable story. I was standing there dripping wet in my board shorts, arms crossed, while two police officers stared me down like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. Behind them, a woman wearing a bright pink sun hat and oversized sunglasses was screaming at the top of her lungs, waving her arms like a maniac trying to direct rush hour traffic. "That is him. That is the trespasser," she shrieked, pointing her perfectly manicured finger right at me. "He has been using our community pool without permission. I want him arrested immediately." One of the officers, a huge guy with a jaw carved out of stone, turned to me and said in a dead serious tone, "Sir, we received a report of trespassing on private HOA property. Can we see your ID?" I could barely believe what was happening. I wasn't even part of their HOA. I did not even live inside their neighborhood. I lived on the ranch next door, a piece of land my father left me when he passed, a ranch that had existed long before their fancy homes and white picket fences ever sprouted up. I wiped pool water from my eyes, trying to stay calm, even as my heart raced with disbelief, not fear. This whole situation was ridiculous. "Sure," I said, handing over my driver's license. "But you're going to feel real silly when you find out what is really going on." Behind the officers, the woman in the pink hat, who I would soon learn was Karen in every possible sense, stood with her arms crossed and a smirk curling at the edges of her lips, like she had already won some invisible battle. The officer took my ID, read it carefully, then looked back at me. "All right, sir, stay right here. We are going to verify some information." I watched as they moved to their squad car, radios crackling, while Karen threw smug glances my way. Parents and kids gathered around the pool, whispering and pointing. The sun beat down relentlessly, the concrete hot beneath my bare feet. I had a terrible sinking feeling that this was about to spiral into something much worse than just an embarrassing scene at the community pool. As I stood there, dripping and baffled, another figure stormed toward me. It was an older man in a red polo shirt, face redder than a tomato, clutching a stack of papers in one hand and rage in the other. He jabbed a finger at me, his voice loud and sharp. "We warned you. You have been using our facilities without paying dues. You are a freeloader and a thief. We are taking legal action against you." Before I could even respond, he shoved a letter into my chest so hard it crinkled. "Cease and desist," the bold letter screamed at me. I looked back at the officers near the squad car, feeling like the ground under my feet had suddenly shifted. This was no longer just a misunderstanding. It was a full-on attack. But how did it get to this point? Let me take you back a few weeks to when the first spark of this madness was struck. It all started during one of those brutal Texas heat waves, the kind where the air feels heavy and sticky, like you are swimming through hot syrup. I had just finished mending the back fence of my property, dragging myself toward the house covered in sweat and dust, when I heard the sound of laughter and splashing water nearby. Curious, I wandered toward the thin line of trees separating my ranch from the new subdivision and saw it, their brand new community pool, sparkling blue under the blazing sun. Umbrellas dotted the deck, kids shrieked and played, parents sipped lemonade, and for a moment, I smiled. Good for them, I thought. Summer should be full of fun, especially for kids. The funny thing was, my ranch had a small pond back in the day. Growing up, it was our swimming hole, our place for rope swings and cannonball dives. But after Dad passed away, the pond fell into neglect. Weeds grew thick. Water levels dropped. I dreamed of restoring it someday, But money was always tight, and the ranch always demanded more urgent repairs. That was why, when I found a colorful flyer stuffed into my mailbox one afternoon, it caught my eye. It was a bold invitation. Community pool grand opening. Residents welcome. No fine print. No mention of needing HOA membership. Just welcome. I figured it was a casual, open event. This was still a small town after all. Hospitality was a way of life. So the next afternoon, after chores were done, I tossed a towel over my shoulder and wandered toward the pool. The gates were wide open. Kids ran laughing past me. Parents lounged in chairs. Nobody gave me a second glance. I slipped into the pool, swam some laps, cooled off, and felt human again. After days spent sweating under the brutal sun, it was a slice of heaven. I stayed about half an hour, then headed home. No problems. No angry stares. No drama. It was the third visit when I met her, Karen. That day she was sitting in a lounge chair with a clipboard in one hand and an iced coffee the size of a small child in the other. Her sun was so large it could probably block out a solar eclipse. The moment I walked in, she locked onto me like a hawk spotting a rabbit. I gave her a polite nod and a small smile, but she did not return it. Instead, she narrowed her eyes, whispered something to the woman beside her, and lifted her phone to snap a picture of me. That was the moment I knew I had become a target. Still, I shrugged it off, swam a few laps, dried off, and went home. The next morning, a note was taped to my mailbox. Unauthorized use of HOA property will not be tolerated. Final warning. No name, no signature, just a threat in bold black print. I crumpled it up and tossed it without a second thought. They had no jurisdiction over me. I was not part of their HOA. My ranch was older than their subdivision by decades. Surely, I thought they would realize their mistake and move on. I stayed away from the pool for a few days, just to be safe. But Karen was not the type to forgive or forget. 2 days later, I spotted her standing at the edge of the tree line with 2 other women, one of them holding a thick folder stuffed with documents. They pointed at my house, whispering urgently, plotting something. That night, I sat on the porch, cold drink in hand, Duke the old hound at my feet, staring into the dark Texas sky and feeling the first rumble of a storm I could not see yet but could feel in my bones. The next morning, the heat was worse than ever. My ancient air conditioner rattled and died sometime around noon, leaving me gasping for relief. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I slipped over to the pool one more time, kept my head low, nobody would notice. Wishful thinking. I had barely set foot in the water when Karen's voice cut through the thick air like a blade. There he is. That is him. I am calling the police. This time, she meant it. 5 minutes later, the squad car rolled in. Lights flashing. No sirens. A scene was building, and I was right at the center of it. And so there I stood, dripping wet, the eyes of the neighborhood boring into me, as the officers grilled me and Karen rallied her troops behind her, feeding them lies, anger, and fear. When the man in the red polo showed up, jabbing his finger at me, calling me a thief, and shoving legal threats into my chest, I realized the truth. This was never about a pool. It was about control. About fear, about someone deciding I did not belong. And it was about to get a whole lot worse before it got any better. The officers kept me waiting by the poolside for what felt like an eternity as Karen hovered nearby, throwing smug looks in my direction as if she were a queen who had finally conquered some foreign land. When they returned, their faces were tight, unreadable, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. One of them handed my ID back carefully, the plastic slightly slick from my wet fingers, and said in a tone that was almost apologetic, but still professional, "Sir, you are not listed as a resident of this community. You do not appear to have any formal affiliation with the HOA." Karen practically exploded with glee at those words, clapping her hands together like a kid getting the last piece of birthday cake. Before I could even process it, the man in the red polo shirt stormed back into the center of the scene, waving another stack of papers like a weapon. "Then we will take him to civil court," he barked, thrusting the documents toward the officers. Around us, a buzz ran through the crowd, parents murmuring, phones coming out to record the moment. I felt the world tilt a little, the concrete under my bare feet searing with heat and humiliation. This was only just the beginning. After the officers left, muttering that they could not intervene in civil matters, Karen strutted around the pool area like she had just scored the winning touchdown at the Super Bowl. She told anyone who would listen that they were going to sue me for thousands of dollars in back dues for using their facilities without permission. People pulled out their phones and started filming as if they were documenting a celebrity scandal rather than a ridiculous neighborhood dispute. I walked back to my ranch that day feeling like the walls were closing in. It was not just embarrassment anymore. It was personal, and it was only going to get worse. The next morning, I woke up to Duke barking like a madman at the end of the driveway. I stumbled outside, still half asleep, and saw a white car awkwardly parked by my mailbox. Karen was there, wearing the same ridiculous sun hat, accompanied by a woman in a stiff gray skirt suit who looked like she had swallowed a lemon. The woman handed over a thick manila envelope, and Karen spotted me standing barefoot on the porch. She waved the envelope like a flag of war and shouted across the dusty yard, "You have been served." I did not respond. I did not yell. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing any anger. Instead, I just nodded once, slow and deliberate, and watched her face twitch with irritation as she stomped back to her car. Dust rose in their wake as they sped off. I picked up the envelope, heavy and foreboding, and opened it right there on the porch steps. Inside was exactly what I had expected: a civil lawsuit filed against me for trespassing, demanding $5,000 in damages. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to meet Mr. Whitmore, an old family friend who had helped my father with the ranch's legal work years ago. I slid the envelope across his desk, watching as he opened it and skimmed the pages. When he finished reading, he leaned back in his chair and laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "They are suing you for what?" he said between chuckles, wiping tears from his eyes. I explained everything from the beginning while he listened, face growing more serious as the story unfolded. Finally, he tapped the papers with one thick finger and said, "Son, they do not have a legal leg to stand on. Your ranch predates their subdivision by decades. You are not part of their HOA. You never agreed to their terms. They cannot retroactively force you into compliance. In fact, if they are trying to assert authority over your land, they are opening themselves up to some serious legal consequences." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning forward. Mr. Whitmore grinned like a man who had just spotted a crack in the enemy's wall. "If they are claiming your property falls under their HOA," he said, "they are illegally expanding their jurisdiction without proper authorization. That is a big no-no. That is harassment. That is abuse of process. Maybe even defamation if they spread false information about you." He scribbled something on a yellow notepad and slid it over to me. "We are going to turn this whole thing back on them," he said. "Get ready. It is going to get messy, but we are going to fight back. And we are going to win." That night, under a sky full of stars, I sat on my porch with Duke at my feet and drafted a letter with Mr. Whitmore's help. A very official letter. It explained clearly and firmly that I was not a member of their HOA, that I had never signed any agreement, that their actions constituted harassment and could result in legal action against them if they persisted. The next morning, with the sun already blazing hot, I marched right into their HOA meeting. They had set up a big white tent in the grassy common area. Inside were about 20 residents sitting in plastic chairs, Karen and Rick, the HOA president, sitting at the front like king and queen. I walked straight up to the front table, placed the letter down in front of Rick, and said in a loud, clear voice for everyone to hear, "You are messing with the wrong guy." You could have heard a pin drop. Heads turned, necks craned. Karen's face flushed an ugly shade of red. Rick grabbed the letter, his hands shaking slightly as he scanned the words. I tipped my hat politely to the stunned crowd, turned on my heel, and walked out. Behind me, I heard Rick's voice rising, panicked. "Get the lawyer on the phone, now." I smiled to myself as I crossed the lawn. It was a small victory, but it felt good. It felt like the first shot fired in a war I had not wanted but was now fully prepared to fight. 3 days later, I found a huge bright red notice taped to my front gate. Final warning: vacate premises immediately. Failure to comply will result in HOA action. I stared at the words, my blood boiling. They were now trying to evict me from my own ranch. Land that had been in my family for generations. Land that was not even remotely part of their subdivision. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Karen, Rick, and their little army had declared all-out war, and I was not going down without a fight. I peeled the notice off the gate carefully, laid it flat on my kitchen table, and photographed it from every angle. Mr. Whitmore had made it clear. Document everything. Pictures, videos, witnesses, whatever I could gather. That night, I set up security cameras around the ranch. I installed motion sensors, floodlights, and even a few old-school trip alarms. Duke stayed close to my side, his ears perked and his body tense, as if he sensed that the fight had only just begun. Around midnight, I spotted them. 3 cars parked just outside the property line, engines idling, headlights off. Dark figures sitting inside, watching, waiting. I stayed inside, lights off, cell phone unlocked and ready to dial the sheriff at the first sign of trouble. They sat there for nearly an hour before finally driving away into the night. It was a warning, a threat, and it only strengthened my resolve. The next morning, I drove with Mr. Whitmore to the county recorder's office. We pulled every deed, every land map, every official document tied to my ranch. We built a case so solid it could have withstood a hurricane. My ranch predated their subdivision by 70 years. Their claims were less than worthless. They were criminal. As the sun set over the Texas hills that evening, painting the sky in hues of fire and blood, I sat on my porch with the evidence spread around me. Every scrap of proof I needed to protect my land, my legacy, my home. I was no longer just fighting for a place to swim. I was fighting for my family's history, for every fence post and field and dusty trail. Karen and Rick had no idea what they had started, and they were about to learn the hard way that some battles you do not walk away from without getting burned. The air around the ranch grew heavier with every passing day, as if the very land itself was bracing for the storm to come. After collecting every document proving the independence of my property, I thought maybe, just maybe, the battle would stay in the courtrooms where facts could win out over petty grudges. I was wrong. The HOA, or at least the rogue elements led by Karen and Rick, had no intention of fighting fair. They had tasted a little power and it had gone straight to their heads. They were not going to back down quietly. One evening, after patching up an old fence along the west pasture, I sat on the porch sipping sweet tea with Duke curled up at my feet when I heard tires crunching gravel. It was not coming from the main road, but from the old service path through the woods, a path so forgotten most folks in town did not even know it existed. My gut tightened immediately. I set my tea down slowly, stood, and peered into the growing twilight. Out from the tree line rolled a black SUV, bigger and meaner than anything I had seen around here before. The vehicle stopped just short of my property line, dust swirling in the fading light. 3 men stepped out. They wore dark suits, too formal for ranch country, their movements deliberate and heavy like men who were used to throwing their weight around. One of them wore a badge clipped to his belt that read Private Enforcement. Another carried a clipboard thick with papers. They did not smile. They did not wave. They simply marched up to my fence like they owned the place. I stayed where I was, arms loose at my sides, heart hammering against my ribs. Duke growled low at my feet, his hackles raised. The lead man stepped forward, slapped a thick envelope against the top rail of my fence, and said in a gravelly voice that carried over the quiet field, "You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 72 hours. This property is under dispute." I stared at him, cold fury building inside me. "This is private land," I said through gritted teeth. "You have no authority here." He just shrugged, the kind of casual, dismissive gesture that made my blood boil even hotter. "Take it up with the courts," he said, turning on his heel. The three of them climbed back into their SUV without another word and disappeared down the dusty track, leaving the envelope flapping in the wind like some obscene flag. I snatched it up and tore it open right there. Inside were dozens of pages of legal jargon, threats, demands. It was not just the HOA anymore. They had brought in outside muscle, corporate lawyers from 2 counties over. They were trying to claim eminent domain, arguing that the community needed to expand and that my ranch was standing in the way of progress. They were not just coming after me. They were trying to steal my home, legally on paper, with fancy words and slick suits. My hands shook with rage as I gathered the documents and stormed inside. I called Mr. Whitmore immediately. He picked up on the first ring. I told him everything, every dirty detail. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he spoke. "They are not just after your ranch anymore, son," he said. His voice dropped low, serious. "They are trying to annex everything around you too." It felt like the world tilted under my feet. "What do you mean?" I said, my voice rough. "They have filed petitions to expand the HOA's borders by annexing all the surrounding properties within a 2-mile radius," he said. "Farms, ranches, old homesteads, everything. They want to turn the whole valley into some luxury gated community. Golf courses, shopping centers, high-end housing. They see your land and the lands around you as nothing more than dollar signs." I sat down hard at the kitchen table, the stack of legal papers scattered around me like the debris from a bomb blast. "They cannot do this," I said hoarsely. "It is illegal. It is wrong." Mr. Whitmore agreed, but he also made it clear they were going to try anyway. They had money now. Investors, developers, real estate tycoons who saw the rolling hills and golden fields not as a way of life, but as future profits to carve up and sell off. That night, I barely slept. I paced the porch, Duke following my every step, his tail low and tense. I thought about my dad, about all the work he put into this ranch. I thought about my grandfather, who built the original house with his own 2 hands. I thought about every fence post I had dug, every calf I had delivered, every damn inch of sweat-soaked soil that had been earned by blood and backbreaking labor. I was not going to lose it. I was not going to roll over for a bunch of pencil pushers who had never worked a real day in their lives. First thing the next morning, I got in my truck and started driving. Farm to farm, ranch to ranch, knocking on doors. I went to the Johnsons, the Millers, the Thompsons, every neighbor I had ever waved to at the general store or seen at the county fair. One by one, I told them what was happening. I showed them the papers. I explained what the HOA was trying to do. At first there was disbelief, then anger, and then something stronger, resolve. We might not have been rich. We might not have had fancy lawyers or shiny suits. But we had something they did not. Grit. Community. Loyalty. By the end of the week, we had formed a coalition. We called it the Ranchers Defense League. Half joking, but deadly serious underneath. Mr. Whitmore helped us draft formal legal objections, petitions, cease and desist letters. We pooled our money and hired our own private investigator, an old grizzled Marine named Sam who had no love for corporate bullies and a knack for finding dirt they thought was buried. We set up rotating watches at property lines, kept cameras rolling 24/7. We were not going to let them steal our land. Not without a fight. Things held steady for a little while. There were meetings, paperwork, endless conference calls. But underneath it all, the tension crackled like dry brush ready to ignite. And then one evening, just when it felt like maybe we could hold the line, a letter arrived at my ranch. It was not mailed. It was hand-delivered. No return address. No name. Just one line scrawled across the page in thick black ink. Sell or suffer the consequences. I stared at it for a long time, the meaning sinking into my bones like ice water. This was no longer just about legal threats. This was personal. Someone wanted me scared. Someone wanted me desperate. Maybe even wanted me gone. I showed the letter to Mr. Whitmore. He frowned deeply and photographed it for evidence. Could be a bluff, he said. Or it could be a real threat. Either way, we need to be ready. And ready we were. We doubled patrols around the ranch. Sam rigged up extra cameras, motion lights, even a few old-fashioned trip alarms hidden among the trees. Duke never left my side. Every night he lay by the door, ears perked, ready to defend his home. 2 nights after the letter came, just after midnight, Duke went berserk. He barked and growled like I had never seen before, spinning in frantic circles near the back porch. I grabbed my shotgun and my flashlight and ran outside into the cool darkness. The ranch was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I scanned the tree line, heart pounding against my ribs, every nerve in my body screaming that something was wrong. At first, there was nothing. Just the rustle of dry leaves and the distant hum of crickets. But then I caught it, the faint snap of a twig, the glint of something metal in the moonlight. A figure, dressed in black, moving toward the barn with something long and heavy in their hands. Without thinking, I shouted, "Hey, stop right there." The figure froze for a split second, then bolted, crashing through the trees. I chased them across the pasture, Duke barking furiously at my side. My boots pounded against the dirt, adrenaline pumping hard and fast. The figure was fast, but not fast enough. As they scrambled over the back fence, they dropped something heavy. I skidded to a halt and shined my flashlight down at the ground. It was a metal canister with a burning fuse. My stomach dropped to my boots. It was a firebomb, a homemade explosive. It was ticking. Without thinking, I scooped it up and ran, sprinting across the field as fast as my legs could carry me, away from the house, away from Duke, away from everything I loved. At the far end of the field, just before the old dry creek bed, I hurled the canister with everything I had. I dove to the ground, covering my head. 3 seconds later, it exploded. It was not like in the movies. No giant fireball. Just a deep, ugly thump that shook the ground and sent a cloud of smoke into the night sky. I scrambled to my feet, coughing, wiping soot from my face. Flames licked at the dry grass, spreading fast. I grabbed the emergency hose by the barn and started spraying water like a madman. Neighbors saw the smoke and came running, bringing buckets, shovels, anything they could grab. We fought the fire side by side in the dark, shouting over the roar of the flames, stamping out embers, digging fire breaks with our bare hands. By sunrise, the fire was out. The damage was contained. But the message was clear. This was war now. The smoke still hung low over the pasture as the first sheriff's cruiser pulled up, its headlights slicing through the gray haze of early morning. I stood near the scorched ground, breathing heavily, soot smeared across my arms and face, watching as deputies spread out with grim faces, taking photos, collecting evidence, dusting for prints. I showed them the blackened remains of the homemade bomb, the scorch marks fanning out from where it had landed, the deep gouge torn into the dirt by the force of the blast. "This is no longer a civil dispute," the sheriff said sharply. "This is attempted arson, attempted destruction of property, and maybe even something worse, depending on what else we find." Sam, our private investigator, showed up not long after, still tugging his boots on, eyes sharp and scanning the damage like a man reading a battlefield. He checked the cameras, the tripwires, the motion sensors, every inch of the fence line. It did not take him long to pull up a grainy image of the figure who had run across the field. One of the new security contractors the HO had quietly hired without permits, an ex-bouncer with a record for violence. Hired muscle, hired to intimidate, hired to terrorize. But it had backfired. By noon, the county prosecutor had been called in. Criminal charges were filed not just against the thug who planted the bomb, but against several HOA board members for authorizing illegal security operations. Karen and Rick found themselves at the center of a firestorm they had no idea how to contain. News trucks began rolling into town, their satellite dishes glittering in the sun like metal vultures. Reporters set up across from my ranch, microphones ready, cameras rolling. The headlines spread like wildfire. Rancher targeted by HOA extremists. Small town rocked by firebomb attempt. Public opinion turned faster than anyone could have imagined. Support poured in from all corners of the state. Farmers, ranchers, even city folks who had never set foot on a piece of Real land wrote letters, sent donations, volunteered legal aid. Our Little Ranchers Defense League exploded overnight into a full-blown movement. Within 2 weeks, the entire HOA board resigned in disgrace. Karen was charged with multiple counts of harassment, conspiracy, and abuse of process. Rick lost his real estate license and fled the state, his dreams of turning the valley into a playground for the rich and powerful crumbling to dust. The civil suits piled up against them so fast the courthouse had to schedule extra hearings just to keep up. Their dream of luxury homes and country clubs evaporated like morning dew under the Texas sun. Meanwhile, I got to work rebuilding what had been damaged. Neighbors showed up with trucks and tools, helping replant the burned pasture, fixing broken fences, offering meals and supplies without being asked. Kids ran laughing through the fields again. Dogs chased rabbits through the tall grass, and the air began to smell like freedom instead of fear. One day, after finishing repairs on the old barn, I erected a brand new sign at the front gate. A solid sheet of steel, 6 feet tall, bolted deep into concrete footings so no one could tear it down. It read in bold black letters, "Private property. Always was. Always will be. No HOA allowed." As the sun set behind it, casting a long shadow across the gravel road, I stood there with Duke by my side, a cold drink in my hand, and watched the sky turn from gold to crimson to deep indigo. The ranch was peaceful again. The kind of peace you do not take for granted once you have fought like hell to earn it. People still drive by sometimes, slowing down to take a look at the sign or to wave. Some of them stop to shake my hand. Some just tip their hats from behind the wheel. Every once in a while, a stranger comes snooping around, but Duke always lets them know exactly how welcome they are not. And every evening, when the air cools and the cicadas start singing, I sit on the porch and think about everything we went through, about how close we came to losing everything, and about how hard we fought to hold on to it. We were not the richest. We were not the loudest. But we had the truth. And we had each other. Maybe that is what it takes sometimes in a world that seems hell-bent on bulldozing the little guy. You stand your ground. You plant your boots deep. You fight not because you are angry, but because you know what is right. And you never let anyone take what is yours without one hell of a fight. As Duke let out a contented sigh at my feet, I leaned back in my chair and smiled into the deepening twilight. They had come for my land. They had come for my history. They had come for my future. And I had sent them packing with nothing but dust in their mouths. Some things money cannot buy. Some things papers cannot steal. Some things no HOA, no corporation, no army of suits will ever be able to touch. Not now. Not ever.